Hello, and welcome everyone to the 20th webinar in Contact's Produce Safety webinar series. This third season continues to tackle fresh produce safety topics every month through a dynamic webinar that brings together industry, academia, and regulatory minds to solve some of the produce industry's most timely challenges. This series is part of a larger industry outreach and risk mitigation project called Contact, where scientific challenges and cost-effective management of risks associated with implementation of produce safety regulations. This project is supported by a specialty crops research initiative from the USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the view of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Who is Contact, you might ask? Over 10 different universities and government institutions make up the Contact team, which is comprised of over 50 faculty, staff, students, and volunteers, not to mention the support of our PAC, or Produce Advisory Committee. It takes a village, and we appreciate each individual's support and ongoing efforts to make Contact a grant championed by you all. This year, we will begin each webinar with an update. Objective 7 was to develop surveys of the fresh produce industry to better understand their food safety priorities on various topics, ranging from agricultural water to post-harvest sanitizers to environmental monitoring practices. Here, we're going to show a little bit about our EMP survey in fresh produce packing houses. This was just accepted in Food Protection Trends. Approximately 62.5% of produce packers who responded to the survey indicated they had an environmental monitoring program. ATP was the most common monitoring technique used for Zone 1 surfaces, followed by generic E. coli, Listeria species, and aerobic plate counts. However, we noticed a shift towards addition and greater reliance on pathogen targets, things like Salmonella or Listeria monocytogenes, for zones 2 through 4. While 100% of produce packers with an environmental monitoring program had corrective actions identified and in place, only 42% reported ever needing to implement a corrective action, suggesting that produce packers were always in conformance. This result indicates a potential shortfall in EMP rigor, as occasional failures are expected and honestly wanted. That's how we know when things are going wrong and what to fix. Overall, our survey findings can be used as a baseline to assess changes in environmental monitoring programs over time and to emphasize potential points of confusion when conducting outreach to the fresh produce industry. For example, do you even need an environmental monitoring program? And why would you have one? Be sure to check out the Contact website and YouTube page for more produce safety resources, including our objective updates, key takeaway documents, webinar recordings, and so much more. Subscribe to our page to get instant notifications of content, like our newly dropped mini webinars, and even this webinar today when the recording is posted. Stay tuned for our spring 2024 webinar list, which will be released soon. We are just finalizing it. But potential topics on the docket include outbreak investigations, controlled and environmental agriculture, food safety culture, agricultural water, environmental monitoring programs, post-harvest water management, and even more on FSMA 204. So the reason that you all are here today, a quick reminder before we start, if you would like to submit a question for our speakers during or before the Q&A session, please submit your questions through the Q&A box and not the chat box. Now, let's welcome our speakers, Tammi Frederick, Michelle Danyluk, and Jill Hollingsworth. Tammi Frederick has over 30 years of experience in the food industry with expertise in food safety, quality, and product development and regulatory. Tammi is the Vice President, Quality Assurance and Food Safety for HEB. During her 17 years with HEB, she has served in numerous leadership roles in quality assurance, including own brand, retail, and Metrics 360 Laboratory. Prior to HEB quality assurance roles, Tammi was a product development manager for 6 years working on products for the HEB portfolio. Tammi earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Animal Science from Texas A&M University and her Master's degree in Meat Science from Texas Tech University. So welcome, Tammi. Michelle Danyluk is a professor and extension specialist at the University of Florida. who is also the project director of the Contact Grant, so our fearless leader. She is a past president of the International Association of Food Protection and has a long history of support for the fresh produce industry in many different research and outreach roles. Michelle is also a member of the International Commission on Microbial Specification for Foods, as well as one of the leaders of the FSMA Southern Center. She is also a graduate of UC Davis, the University of Georgia, and Alberta. And one huge professional milestone, it would be remiss not to mention, Michelle has just hit publishing 100 peer-reviewed publications in scientific journals. Pretty impressive. Dr. Jill Hollingsworth has over 30 years of experience in food safety, food regulation, and veterinary public health in both the public health and private sectors. At Ecolab, Dr. Hollingsworth provides guidance and consulting services to the food industry with a focus on retail store operations and regulatory compliance. A perfect speaker for today. Previously, she worked at FMI as the Senior Vice President of Food Safety Programs, where she was responsible for technical support, guidance, advocacy, and education for FMI's 1,000 food, retail, and wholesale companies worldwide. Dr. Hollingsworth has a BS degree in agricultural science and received a doctorate of veterinary medicine degree, a DVM, from the University of Georgia. So, Tammi, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate the introduction and certainly appreciate the time this afternoon to talk about such a critical topic and something that is top of mind for all of us. I know that for me, I have the pleasure of leading a great team of food safety professionals across our manufacturing, supply chain, retail, own brand, regulatory, and our laboratory teams. So I am here representing all of my great partners that do this every day in order to ensure customer protection and customer safety and brand protection on a daily basis. I'm honored to be here with everyone to give you the retailer perspective. Before I jump in, if you'll go to the I did want to provide a short introduction to HEB for anyone that's not aware. HEB is a retailer with stores in Texas and Mexico with a rich 118-year history and over 154,000 partners, which is what we call our employees. We currently have 429 locations, 79 of those being in Mexico, and the remaining number in Texas. As you see across the top of the screen, we have 4 different unique formats that serve customers in a variety of ways, very specifically and uniquely for that customer base. And we're very proud of that. Also, our own brand or private label products is something that we're very proud of, with over 24,000 products in our portfolio and a team of dedicated partners that work on those items on a daily basis. I am proud to say we employ over 200 partners that are dedicated to QA and food safety for the company, and that is certainly something that I'm honored and very proud of. If you go to the again, as a privately held company, our culture and values are key to our ability to compete in this market. So the way we describe our values at work, number 1, innovative stores. Secondly, products that customers love at prices they love even more. And then last but never least, our partners who are the difference. We are a people first company, and we're very proud of that as part of our rich history. For the purpose of our discussion today, though, I think if we focus on this innovative store bullet point, first and foremost, innovation is at our core. And so with that, innovation does not come without risk. And so I think that's why this topic is near and dear to our heart here at HEB, but I'm imagining it's also the reason that you tuned in today, because the more we innovate, the more we push the needle, the more we have to look at risk mitigation and how we can safely deliver these products for customers each and every day. I also want to keep in mind, as I go through this information today, I am talking about produce anywhere in the store. So beyond traditional produce department, if you think about other areas where you are handling produce and or selling produce, consider produce that may be in salads, produce that may be in a meal kit or on a sandwich or served in a restaurant. And so Again, the context would be all things produce in a retail environment. So for all of us in the food business, we've signed up to do this and it is our passion, but it is clear that outbreaks and recalls in fresh produce have been and continue to be top of mind because in most situations, we do not have the benefit of a kill step for this raw agricultural commodity that we convert into ready-to-eat foods for consumers. As a retailer, we know and understand that we share the responsibility for protecting the consumer of these great produce items that they want to consume. As we review our business, we consider two different scenarios. First and foremost is contaminated product may enter our stores. So what are the risk mitigation strategies to prevent contaminated product from entering? Secondly, cross-contamination potential from handling that we may do throughout our supply chain, which I'll get into more details as we go through the presentation. So the safety of produce in our supply chain is critically important. As a retailer, we must ensure that the products we provide to our customers are fresh and come from reputable growers and distributors. The entire supply chain must be considered and assessed for food safety risks and proper control of those risks. Each step of the supply chain deserves and warrants review and risk assessments. As we look at the supply chain, and again, it is farm to fork, all the way from supplier packing sheds through distributor transport into the retail warehouse, through transportation, into store receiving, back of house, production, and then finally merchandising for the customer, and then as they purchase. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is to look at each of these boxes individually and independently for risk mitigation strategies at each step of the process. Supplier management is a key aspect of risk mitigation. Retailers must establish and effectively manage produce supplier approval programs for both foreign and domestic suppliers. A few examples are listed here on the slide of our approach. First and foremost, we require GFI certification or equivalent approved scheme for our suppliers. We also leverage LGMA certification because it does, as we all know, provide some basic standards and requirements for growers and for mitigating risk. Produce assessment surveys, certainly key. Foreign supplier verification. Again, there are three approaches for foreign supplier verification for produce. It can be retailer as the importer of record, supplier as the importer of record, or a comparable country for those products that FDA has deemed coming from a country that has comparable food safety programs, such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. At a minimum, HEB conducts a foreign supplier verification review, including the GF audit report, hazard analysis review, process flow review, and the history of any import alerts and refusals. Again, all of this information and data does require some sort of supplier management system to house certificates, audit reports, and key supplier information. This can be managed with paper and Excel formats. You need a supplier management tool to be able to manage this, not only the first touch when you bring the supplier in the first time, but for annual renewals, certificate renewals, et cetera. As we work through each sector of the supply chain, produce warehouse inbound inspections are critically important. For HEB, we do have trained inspectors at every produce warehouse for inbound inspections. Again, no surprise, product temperature verification is key to maintaining safety throughout the cold chain and through transit, verifying that it's meeting our specifications for temperature at receipt. Once you receive those products, they're yours. And so this inbound element is very important. Also, verification of weights, sampling. So for HEB today, we inspect a minimum of 1% of all items that come in order to check that it's meeting our specifications and meeting what we bought so that we can ensure the customer experience for this product is going to meet their needs. We also do testing on solids and bricks and other criteria depending on the product. And then certainly ripening is a factor for key items such as bananas, avocados, peaches. And so having this line of defense, if you will, for incoming produce is a big part of our program. In addition to inbound we also do produce hygiene monitoring, where we randomly select products to test for generic E. coli. And we have a rigorous produce pesticide monitoring program to ensure that we are watching different products for a whole line of pesticides to ensure that we're holding our suppliers accountable to safe production. I do have to say, I know I have an advantage in being able to do these things in-house because we do have our own ISO 5 accredited laboratory, Metrics 360, right here that is able to do this type of testing for us and generate this data and scorecards for our suppliers. Looking at good retail practices, obviously preventive measures that include practices and procedures to effectively control the introduction of pathogens, chemicals, and physical objects in food that are prerequisites to instituting a HACCP or risk control program and are not necessarily specifically addressed in the FDA food code. Again, here's a long list of items that we have built into our GRPs. The foundation begins with employee health and personal hygiene, facility and equipment requirements. Again, I think we can all agree in most retail situations, our departments, our production departments may or may not have been designed to do the volume that we do today. And so workflow design, cross-contamination prevention, and creativity with these to continue to be able to produce safely day in and day out, even with different seasons, different volume constraints as we think about the holidays coming up, et cetera. Receiving, storage, production, and display standards, also big consideration. No surprise, time and temp monitoring and control, and having this built into the day-to-day operation so that people can take action if they're getting out of compliance or there's a situation or an issue. Similar to any manufacturing environment, master sanitation programs must be designed, including validated SOPs that are effectively trained and executed for all stores. Since we are producing ready-to-eat products, it is strongly recommended that an effective environmental monitoring program is designed and implemented. And we can never forget about pest management. So we must have a robust integrated pest management program and SOPs for handling any situations that occur. Recall and emergency response management must be defined so that if there is an issue, the teams know their accountability, everybody knows their responsibility, so that you can effectively and efficiently remove any impacted product from the store level. Training can never be forgotten, and there's lots of different layers and levels of training, everything from certified food manager to annual food handler training, tailored training regarding how to take temps in the department and how to log and or document those if you have a digital solution or paper solution. And then obviously training reports and ensuring that all of the relevant employees or partners are getting the required training that they need in order to effectively and efficiently do their job. And then last but not least, internal audits are certainly an important part of any retail food safety program. Some of the most successful retail operations will have a solid self-assessment approach and tool. And then you can utilize internal resources and or third party to be able to have an effective verification program and an audit of your processes and programs. I'll be the first to admit that while these good retail practices look simple, all nicely typed up on a slide, the fact is this is hard to manage, and it does require company commitment to a food safety culture and trained professionals to effectively manage and monitor all of these. For retailers that are doing produce manufacturing, considerations must be taken for production and merchandising or display of these TCS foods. Again, if you think about HACCP plan at the top of the list, if you're producing unpastured juice at retail, there are labeling requirements and considerations. And we look at our operations with a HACCP approach or a HACCP plan, HACCP-based approach to these operations, similar to what you would have in a manufacturing environment. In addition to HACCP, active managerial controls, doing product risk assessments and approval process for a new program, a new piece of equipment, all of those things must be considered. Produce washing, what treatment, what antimicrobial treatment will you use? Where will you do the washing? Do you need brushes or other tools and equipment? For any produce processing, obviously time temp control, cross-contamination, and then how are you going to utilize batch control, traceability, and record keeping. And then last but not least, we get it out on the sales floor, and we still need to make sure that we're managing time temp control and culling and handling the products. Next slide. I know that the other two presenters today are going to give a lot of great information in detail around antimicrobial washes and scientific studies. But as a retailer, it is important to thoroughly understand any intervention that you may be considering and how it can be implemented in your day-to-day processes. The items listed here on the slide are considerations that HEB utilizes and takes for any intervention that we may look at, but specifically for antimicrobial washes, again, making sure it has the right registrations, approvals for your intended use, that you have the data and that for the way you're going to utilize it, that it's going to meet your needs. Certainly for us, having a non-organoleptic impact to the product, safe for employees and customers. How are you going to dispense it? How are you going to test to verify the concentration of the antimicrobial wash? And then obviously with our employees, you always want to make sure that this is easy to implement and execute for consistency across, in our case, 429 stores. Next slide. As I mentioned, Michelle and Jill are going to get into a lot of details, but this is a slide that I wanted to share from Linda Harris at UC Davis. As you are looking at promoting or trying to introduce an antimicrobial wash, from our perspective, this is a simple slide that helps articulate the why and can be utilized as you're meeting with your leaders or executives on why do we want to invest money for an antimicrobial wash. I wanted to share this slide because I think it's just a great, simple illustration of the why for antimicrobial wash in retail. In summary, produce safety at retail requires a multifaceted approach across the entire life of the product from farm to fork. I hope today that as I highlighted supply chain, safety, supplier management, produce specifications, inspections and ripening, produce monitoring programs, good retail practices, safe produce production and display, and antimicrobial produce wash treatment as an effective means to reduce risk, that this gives you some context and some things to think about in your own operation. And again, applicable across traditional produce departments, but then anywhere you may be selling ready to eat raw produce across your retail market. With that, I will pause and turn it over to the next presenter. Thank you for the time, and really appreciate the opportunity to share some perspective from a retailer point of view.
Perfect, thanks. And I'm going to pick up on some of what Tammi was talking about. All right, so I did a literature review of literature related to produce safety out there in the retail environment. And for those of you researchers who might be on the phone now, I can tell you there's not a lot of information actually out there. That being said, there is a fair amount of information on surveys of people going out into the retail environment and grabbing produce items and testing them. 4 different pathogens. I'm not going to talk about that. There's some information about behaviors of handling produce by both employees and by consumers. Again, they're mostly really general and have a little bit of produce in there. There's a fair amount of information about temperatures in the different coolers in a produce section that would be useful in a model. But where I'm really going to focus is on the bottom 3 points here, where there was a little bit more information, but not a lot. The first has to do with cross-contamination of produce from the retail environment. The second has to do with misting, and the third really has to do with those produce washes that Tammi mentioned and that Jill will follow up on later on for back of house. I do want to point to the picture on the right here. For those of you who don't know, that's Carl Matthews. He is a professor at Rutgers University who has retired and whose work I'm going to be sharing a lot of with you today. Laura mentioned I just made 100 papers, peer-reviewed papers. Not one of those peer-reviewed papers is in what I'm going to talk about today, but a bunch of Carl's papers are. We did ask Carl to join us, but he is currently in the Indian Ocean on a USAID project, so he was unable to join us. But with that, let's move on to the and I'll start talking a little bit about cross-contamination from retail environments. I'm going to throw a bunch of papers up here with the citations. I'm going to make sure that Alexis has all of them to add onto the summary document that will come out after this, Alexis and Laura, that we put out. So you no need to frantically write down these different citations that I'm talking about. We will provide them all to you after the webinar. So this first one is work out of Haley Oliver's lab at Purdue University, and they performed a study to determine the prevalence of Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella in the retail produce environment to look for where might be ecological niches. And so they collected 30 environmental samples during daily operations monthly over a 6-month period. They looked at 30 retail produce departments across 7 different states, leading to over 5,000 collected swabs. And those included swabs in both the front of the house and the back of the house, and of food contact surfaces and of non-food contact surfaces. And it's way too small for you to read, but that's their table of what these different food contact surfaces are. So if we look at the results of this, perhaps unsurprising, it was really different on a store-by-store basis. So this is the prevalence of Listeria monocytogenes by store. And the store numbers are across the bottom. And so you can see prevalence going up and down the side here. Huge variability from up towards almost 25% prevalence on Listeria swabs in store number 28, down to 0 in a number of different stores. 5 different stores had no Listeria monocytogenes detected. So a lot of variability between the different stores. And I'm going to share work coming out of here is looking specifically at store number 22, which is a store that I've highlighted in orange there. All right, so this is looking specifically at that store 22 and then looking over the prevalence of monocytogenes monthly in this store. So you can see going down, we've got the different months, July, August, September, October, November, December. And then we've got all the different swab locations. And in the first side of the table, it is the food contact surfaces. And in the second side of the table, it is the non-food contact surfaces. Anywhere that's got an orange box around it is somewhere where they found Listeria monocytogenes. If it's got a purple box around it, that is where they found Salmonella. All right. And if we looked across all the stores, so going back out to that bigger picture, of those more than 5,000 samples, they had a less than 1% positive, in fact, a less than 0.1 prevalence of Salmonella. In fact, the only Salmonella they ever found was in a single store at that single sampling. And so that very much is those purple lines found here on non-food contact surfaces, again, in this store number 22. When you look again at that bigger store number, they did have more positives for environmental Listeria monocytogenes, 4.4 on average, 8.1% prevalence on non-food contact surfaces, and 6.1% on food contact surfaces. I think where those orange boxes are for slide 22 tells a really good story of what's going on here. Most of the positives were found in drains, floors, squeegees, and standing water. And so that very bottom line, where there are 4 boxes on the right-hand side of the table, is a standing water in this store. So not maybe unexpected places to find Listeria monocytogenes. And so their overall conclusion was that prevalence tends to be low. There certainly are places where we could expect to find Listeria monocytogenes and find it in a place where it is become a resident type pathogen. All right, so that's work out of Haley's lab at Purdue, looking at 30 different stores. The next study I'm going to talk about is a study that was run in Laura Strawn's lab with myself and Ben Chapman at North Carolina State University that is unpublished, but hopefully we will get it published again soon. In this case, it focused specifically on Listeria monocytogenes in cantaloupe contact surfaces in stores. And so in this case, met with industry representatives to determine what sort of food contact surfaces exist, and then to understand a little bit more about the cleaning and sanitizing of each one of those different points. Identified 7 common surfaces between the unloading point of those cantaloupe melons and the display case. 7 different surfaces to focus on, looking at washing sinks, cutting board, knives, transportation lugs, drying racks, cushioning foam, and display rack sides. And so you'll see here on the bottom, this is on the left-hand side, there is cushioning foam that the melons are sitting on, including that cushioning foam touching up against the retail display side. And then, of course, drying racks where melons would be dried prior to being fresh cut in the operation. Again, we determined the cleaning and sanitizing protocols for each of these different surfaces, and then swabbing was collected over the course of 1 day for Listeria species, Listeria monocytogenes, and also looking at total aerobic count and coliformis. So again, in this study, they decided to look at 4 different time points. They sampled before operation began on a given day, and then before and after the midday cleaning that was being carried out in these different retail stores, and then swabbing at the end of each operation, so when the store shut for the day. And then they reviewed SOPs for cleaning and sanitizing that was going on in each of these stores on each of these 7 identified surfaces. Did find out that cushioning foam was only replaced as needed, drying racks were cleaned weekly, and most of the fresh cut surfaces were cleaned daily. So we'll look at a little bit of data here. We didn't find, in this case, any Listeria monocytogenes in any of the samples that were collected. What we do have on this slide is showing the number of positives on each different surface across all time points for Listeria species. And so what I really want you to focus on here is that the foam samples, no matter when we sampled them, we were always able to detect Listeria species on those foam surfaces in that produce department that the cantaloupes were sitting on. And the next highest level of places where we found Listeria species was on the side of the display cases. And then that was followed by the drying racks and the lugs. But those 2 highest surfaces, again, that foam and the side, those are locations that were only cleaned as needed or weekly. If we look at those data and break them down by time point, and again, this is Listeria species positive by time point, what we can see is that the number pre-clean was quite high, but the number post-clean did not go down very far. The cleaning and sanitizing that was going on in these operations was not cleaning and sanitizing to a level that did reduce Listeria species on those surfaces. Generally saw very, very high results across the board on different surfaces. This is not only represented by the Listeria counts like I showed, or Listeria presence or absence like I showed on the previous slide. This is also shown by our aerobic plate count. Here again, we've got the colonies or total plate count going up the y-axis and the different surfaces across the x-axis. The light blue bar is cleaning, pre-cleaning, and the dark blue bar is post-cleaning. And again, highlighted in that box, what we see is both the foam and that side of that cantaloupe display case actually had higher total plate counts after cleaning than it had before cleaning. And that trend of those two surfaces of foam and the sides being quite a challenge holds true not only for aerobic plate count, but also for coliforms, where again, coliforms were found both at higher levels after that cleaning had actually occurred. What I will say, and I will point out as well, is the cutting board and the knife surfaces, both in terms of coliform counts and in terms of total aerobic plate counts, had very good reduction during cleaning. So you can see here relatively high counts before cleaning and then nothing detected after cleaning. So really great reduction on those food contact surfaces where we're doing fresh cut. Obviously, the SOPs and the sanitation was very successful in that area, but there were sanitation challenges and there are opportunities around some of those display cases to get a little bit better. All right, I'm going to transition. Oh, and then these are two other papers that are out there. Again, one out of Haley Oliver's lab and another out of the University of Houston that do talk about infrastructure, sanitation, and management practices impacting Listeria monocytogenes prevalence in retail grocery stores. And then another one evaluating food safety behaviors related to handling of fresh and fresh cut leafy greens. So again, these are other papers that exist out there on this topic area. But I will say opportunities and challenges remain in this area. And it's certainly a place where I think there's both a need for more research and increased focus in operations. All right. All right, so I'm going to transition now to talking about a bunch of work that Carl did at Rutgers University. And the first study I'm going to point to is talking about crisping. And so crisping, misting, and storage temperature impact on the growth of Listeria monocytogenes and other bacteria on the surface of romaine lettuce. In this case, I'll point out now, in all of the papers I'm about to talk about that Carl has out of his lab, he talks about something called that's labeled as EW on those slides, standing for electrolyzed water. What this is electrolyzed water generating free chlorine in part per million. And in general, we see part per million free chlorine, right around 50 part per million free chlorine, with a pH generally right at or below 7. So it's usually exactly where we want to see those concentrations. So when you see any slides here that say EW, that EW is electrolyzed water, and it is at 50 part per million free chlorine, right at that neutral pH. Carl puts a bunch of these figures in that talk about the complicated experimental flow that he does in his work and where different samples are. In this case, he's looking at a crisping step, a misting step, and then a subsequent storage step at either 5 or 15 degrees Celsius, so just above 40, and then somewhere just in the high 50s, close to 60 storage Fahrenheit. All right, so what we're looking at here is the data and the changes in population of Listeria monocytogenes as we go through all those different steps on the previous slide. But the take-home messages of what is in this data are here on the right-hand side here. In general, misting appeared to really only have a marginal influence on produce quality or on produce in terms of increasing or decreasing bacterial population. So I know there's a lot of concern, or tends to be a lot of concern about that misting practice, but really Carl didn't see a great influence of that. But crisping, in particular, when you had crisping with that electrolyzed water, so with that water with a 50 part per million free chlorine in it, we did see a negative effect on the survival and growth of LM. But by far what played the greatest role in any of this was the storage temperature, obviously with a warmer storage temperature having a greater impact. All right, Carl did a little bit more work then here on the crisping process. And again, this is the crisping process, but also produce washes in general. And this study was conducted to provide information on mitigating cross-contamination through the use of sanitizer during crisping at the retail outlets. This is exactly the same sort of concept as that previous slide that Jill showed in her work, where she talked about the not wanting to have your water be a source of contamination for melons being washed in it. If one melon comes in dirty, we don't want all the subsequent melons to come in dirty. The slide that she highlighted was from Linda Harris. This is Carl's doing that work, in this case, looking at heads of lettuce. And so what he did is put one inoculated head of lettuce into water, and then he followed that with 7 non-inoculated heads of water, looking at, again, electrolyzed water, that free chlorine. In this case, he's got right around 43 part per million, using an acid-based sanitizer that was a combination of lactic and phosphoric acid, or a citric acid-based sanitizer, and he soaked them for 5 minutes. Then he put 2 subsequent batches of 8 non-inoculated heads in the same solution. So again, 1 inoculated, 7 uninoculated, take those out, then 8 more inoculated, take those out, and then 8 more inoculated, 24 total lettuce. And so what we're seeing here is a number of positive samples in this slide. So positive samples going up the y-axis, and then Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, because he tried it with all the pathogens, and then looking at tap water, which is at TW, which is a control, electrolyzed water, which is at 50 part per million, and then the acid-based sanitizer, and then the citric acid sanitizer. And the point here being that when you had that chlorine level at just right around 50 part per million, you really controlled cross-contamination amongst the heads of lettuce that went into that water to be crisped, and that was independent of the different pathogens out there. The A and B in this graph are 2 different types of lettuce, A being romaine lettuce and B being a red leaf lettuce. So we tried them with both, and again, saw really great control with that electrolyzed water chlorine-based sanitizer. So not only did he do this with lettuce, but he also looked at this with cilantro. So this is exactly the same experimental design I just talked about, instead using bunches of cilantro instead of heads of lettuce. So repeated the same experiment. Cilantro, also chopped the cilantro, but we'll just talk about the cross-contamination here. And again, the finding that he had, if we can move on to the, was that cross-contamination was completely mitigated, again, by having electrolyzed water in the water, again. And with the exception of in one case, and in tap water control, inoculated pathogens were never detected in the soaking water at all. But in this graph, what you're looking at, again, are those 3 different pathogens across the x-axis. We are looking at the number of positive samples across the y-axis, and then the z-axis going back into the page is on those subsequent the number of washes. So that first one is that first set of 8 cilantro bunches that were put into the water, again, where 1 was contaminated and 7 were not. The second is the second bunch of 8 cilantro bunches placed in the water, and then the closest line to us is that third soaking of the water. And again, what we see is that electrolyzed water served as a really great control throughout. I'll just say he's also done the exact same study with cantaloupe, where he's looked at cross-contamination and then looked at transfer while you're cutting cantaloupe melon into cubes in a retail store. So that work is done in this work. And again, he saw very good control using chlorine in the electrolyzed water chlorine at about 15 part per million. And again, cross-contamination was very well controlled in all cases. And of course, in addition to doing this in strawberries, in addition to doing this in lettuce and cilantro, he also has worked in strawberries, although that work is not yet published. This is some work that he'd shared with Jill, who shared with me. And again, using that electrolyzed treated water, that chlorine in the water, no cross-contamination from an inoculated strawberry to other uninoculated berries being washed at back of house. And so that is the end of me talking about Carl's data. So I'll really quickly go into my last slide. And what I'll say is that surfaces and unit operations in the retail can result in cross-contamination of produce. There is a need, I think, for more research in this area. But again, these produce contact surfaces and other surfaces should be designed to allow for effective cleaning and sanitation, and be frequently cleaned and sanitized to make sure that we're not they're not sources of contamination. And then what we've seen from Carl's work is that addition of sanitizers to water, either in the misting process, the crisping process, or the washing process, really can do a great job in preventing cross-contamination, even with multiple reuses of that water. But again, I think more data could be found in that area. And with that, I am glad to turn it over to Jill to talk a little bit more about development of some of these different washes and other things they work on. Jill?
Thank you, Michelle. The first thing I really want to do is give a shout out to Laura. I had mentioned to her almost a year ago that how about we do a contact webinar on retail? And she said, great idea, let's do it. And it's taken us nearly a year to get here, but I'm glad we did it. And also a shout out to Tammi and Michelle, who volunteered to help share their experiences and their research with us as part of this presentation. So just to quickly recap some things that Tammi and Michelle have shared with you is that we do know in retail that fresh produce risks exist. And despite all the great practices, we are so appreciative to the work that's done by the produce industry and IFPA and LGMA and all of them working together. Still, we know, as Tammi mentioned, we don't have a kill step, and we do know that we can get contaminated produce into a retail store. There are two practices in particular that we're going to look at in this presentation, and that is whenever produce products are commingled in water. It's usually a sink of water, product is put in together, and it's done for two reasons, really. The first reason is if the intent is to either crisp or rehydrate. Sometimes it's called reconditioning, and that is mostly done to leafy greens. The second reason people put lots of produce together in a sink of water is to comply with the FDA food code that says if you are going to cut or chop or peel or mix a product or serve a produce product, it has to first be washed. So in either of those cases, we do have product mixed together in a sink of water. But we also know that there are preventive controls available to retailers when they use these practices. And looking over lots of information that comes from the production side, what we've always heard is that the most important prevention is to prevent cross-contamination in the water, because we don't have that kill step, but what we don't want is to cross-contaminate more product. And the other thing is that we've done some work to look at if you're washing product or if you have to wash it because you're going to cut it, one of the safest things you can do is to add a proven antimicrobial treatment into that water. So I'm going to present a case study. It's going to be using hypochlorous acid, which is the electrolyzed water that Michelle was talking about. And it is one of the most commonly used antimicrobial treatments in retail right now. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is, why retailers use it, how they're using it, and what are the benefits. If you look at this little molecular image here, what you can see is HOCl. That is hypochlorous acid. It's made simply by mixing salt and water and putting an electric current through that saltwater solution. What the electricity does basically is breaks down the molecules of water and salt, and you end up with a hydrogen and an oxygen that comes from the water, H2O, and the salt separates. It's normally NaC, but it also splits, and the chlorine combines with one hydrogen, one oxygen, you end up with HOCl. But the beauty of that is hypochlorous acid is readily available because all we need to make it really is water, salt, and the machines that are able to do the electric current through that solution. But we don't have complicated chemicals here or very involved formulas. I am going to, in my case study here, use a specific hypochlorous acid product called Produce Max. It's made by Ecolab, so full disclaimer, but it's one of the most widely used products in retail right now for this purpose. And it used to be considered very innovative. Advanced companies, very progressive retailers like H-E-B were one of the early users of it, but now we have it in over 10,000 sites. So it's becoming more and more popular at retail. So when retailers are looking at a product, and I think Tammi did a good job of explaining this, they want to see if there's a product that can have multiple benefits and do multiple things for them at the same time. When we look at hypochlorous acid, one of the things we wanted to know, and retailers would ask, is tell us everything it can do. So real quickly, here's just a quick rundown. In addition to minimizing, and in many cases, 100% prevention of cross-contamination in the water, it is an EPA-registered antimicrobial. It can achieve up to 5-log reduction of pathogens of concern. It has an FDA safety notification for direct contact on food without a rinse. It meets all the regulatory requirements, Food Code, Federal Register, EPA. It is safe for employees and consumers, and you heard Tammi mention how important that is to them, but it can do more than these safety benefits. It also has quality benefits. It can be used on whole and fresh cut products, so you don't have to switch one product for whole product and another one for cut. And it can be part of a sustainability program, which I'll mention very quickly at the end. And it can be used in misting systems, which is somewhat unusual, but I'll explain why it's important to retailers. So don't need to go over this one really in any more detail. It was just to show that when retailers ask, is HOCl within regulatory compliance? The answer is yes. It's FDA safe for contact. It's in compliance with the Food Code, and it's EPA registered. So then retailers would ask, but is it really effective? And can you show that efficacy is backed up by science? And what we do usually explaining this type of thing is that because we've applied for EPA registration of this product as an antimicrobial, there has to be sufficient science submitted to the EPA to support every claim that we would want to make about this product. This is actually part of the Produce Max label, and these claims that I've highlighted here are claims that we know have been backed by science because they've all been reviewed by EPA before we were allowed to make those claims and put them on the label. So as you can see, what we're achieving here is a 5-log reduction of O157, Salmonella enterica, LM, and we are able to show specifically that it does protect against cross-contamination from the water. And again, let me point out, all these levels of kill are in the water, not on the product itself. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Next. So the other concern, now we go on to, are employees and customers going to be safe if I, as a retailer, am using this product? And hypochlorous acid is unusually safe, but keep in mind, it is a mixture of salt and water. What a lot of people don't know about HOCl is that it is actually naturally produced, even in our bodies. It's produced by white blood cells, and it's used by the human body, or by all mammals, to fight infections because it is so effective at killing pathogens. And it doesn't require any personal protective equipment. It's very safe for the employees to use it. And there's thousands of published papers on the safety of HOCl. I added this little World Health Organization block here because recently I just came upon this report. The World Health Organization did a very in-depth study on advocating the use of hypochlorous acid in human medicine and also in over-the-counter products, health and beauty products. And it is being more and more extensively used in that area. But one of the things that they said in their safety report was, one author said, this should really be used more in the food industry because it does kill pathogens so effectively. So it was nice to see that. But the part I really wanted to point out, because this was part of the WA study, and that was their results showing that there is no allergenic properties in HOCl. So we don't have to worry about allergens. It also, because of the method in which it kills pathogens, it will not build up microbial resistance, even with long-term use. So that's one other thing we can check off as not a concern. There's no respiratory reactions from exposure to it. And their conclusion was that when it's used according to the label instructions, it is non-toxic to people and to the environment. So we feel that this gives retailers a really strong sense of safety when they bring this product into their stores and their employees are using it and customers are eating food that's been exposed to it. So we talked about the importance of having the efficacy data and showing what it can do and how it, by preventing cross-contamination, makes food safer. But we also felt that we needed to have this multiple benefit. And so we started to look at the quality. What quality changes can be made by using hypochlorous acid and Produce Max? And what we found was that it does also control spoilage and decay-causing bacteria. And so by doing so, it will extend the shelf life of the product, and it actually makes the product look fresher, and it does stay fresher longer in the store. Another advantage, and I mentioned this earlier, but it can be used on whole product. If you're going to be cutting up cantaloupe, you can use it to wash the outside of the cantaloupe, but you can also use it on cut fruits and vegetables, which is very useful when we have retail stores that use Produce Max in the water, wash water, not just back of house, but also in other locations. And I think Tammi had mentioned this, where we also are cutting up and using product like in the deli, in meals to go, in the bakery. So it can be used in other places throughout the retail store. And the other piece of this, which is interesting, is that it can reduce pathogens on the surface of processed fruits and vegetables. Now, we know nobody is allowed to make a kill claim on the surface of any processed food or vegetable. It's not allowed by EPA because we cannot get a consistent kill and repeat it over and over. So we know we can't say that we have a specific kill step, but what we can say, and again, this appears on the label, is that it can reduce the levels. And what we traditionally see, it varies tremendously depending on the type of product and the organic load. But what we normally see is a 1 to 3 log reduction on the surface itself. Excuse me. I had mentioned sustainability. One of the things that we have found when using hypochlorous acid in the water to wash and or to crisp produce is that by controlling the spoilage organisms, you do get an extended shelf life. And many retailers are trying to find ways they can reduce their shrink and not have to throw away so much product. It also saves water. As Michelle mentioned, in some of the studies that have been done, the same water can be reused 3 to 5 times. Again, this varies depending on the organic load, depending on the type of product. But with some other antimicrobials, each time you use it, you have to drain the sink, refill it with fresh water. With this, in this case, the antimicrobial, so long as the concentration stays above 30, which is on the label, that's the concentration requirement, then you can keep using that water. And so it does lead to a large water savings for the retailer. And again, as far as labor, what we have found is that there's a lot less time spent on trimming produce or culling bad produce because it is staying fresher and longer on the shelf. And there we go. As far as using it in a misting system, this is an interesting use of Produce Max because it's not an antimicrobial in this sense. The concentration level is at potable water levels, so you're not going to get any kind of a kill step or even do anything to reduce pathogens in the water. It's not its intent. But in the misting lines, what we have found is that it will keep those lines clean. There are no odor-causing bacteria buildup. And I just put 2 slides here two pictures to kind of show examples of that. When we were looking at the nozzles, the misting nozzles, over time, those nozzles get a buildup and it might be chalky, it might be slimy. but we found that they were building up almost like sometimes it's pink, sometimes green, moldy looking. But when we were putting Produce Max at the proper levels through the misting lines, that problem disappeared, and it keeps the nozzles looking really nice. The other picture that you see in the lower corner was it's the bottom of a wet rack where produce is draining, the misting system is on it, and there's drains at the bottom. Those drains are just, no one likes to clean them. It's a big mess to clean a wet rack. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of scrubbing. These racks tend to get buildup, sometimes slimy. What we found was when we were putting hypochlorous acid in the misting system, much of that went away. They were easier to clean. They weren't getting slimy. And employees who are responsible for cleaning these racks would tell us it was noticeable to them. And one of the things we're hoping is that if we can make this type of equipment easier to clean, it will be cleaned better. It hopefully will be cleaned more often, and it will be far easier to sanitize it. I only put this in case someone had a question about EPA and its review of science and how they determine if a product can be an antimicrobial for this use. EPA, if you're familiar with them, they consider antimicrobials as a pesticide. So they have to be submitted to the EPA, to their antimicrobial division for thorough review before they will allow any kind of antimicrobial and kill claims to be made, which is the information I have shared with you today that you see on the label of Produce Max. That has all been sent to EPA for review. And it's a very rigorous procedure from start to finish. That whole process can take anywhere from 2 to 4 years. So it's not something we just mix up in the lab and try to get people to use. We feel there's a very strong basis for using antimicrobials in the wash water. And we encourage retailers to consider doing this because it is one of the best tools that we have for retail to make products safer if you are washing and crisping or if you have a fresh cut program. And with that, I am finished. And thanks again, Laura, for all your help for pulling us together.
Thank you again. I think it was great. And yes, we will do retail before a year later, I promise. It's always really interesting. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful close to their 2023. We will see you in 2024. But in the meantime, while you don't hear from us, I hope you have a great rest, relaxation, spend time with family and friends, and recharge. So take care and see you in 2024.